Okay, see, now it looks like it doesn't need that, but it does. Looked over Manifest Destiny. Very, very pretty cover. Has the unfortunate claim of card-driven strategy game, which almost makes it sound like this is going to be a CDG. Maybe it isn't. It really isn't. Do they make any claims on the back? Not really. But clearly they were trying to catch on to that CDG type card-driven word link up, and I think it's a mistake because this game is more, it's not based on the CDG background at all. What it fits most with out of all games is Age of Renaissance, which I mentioned a number of times in the series. It is a very, very similar game. In fact, I would say it's pretty much a transfer of an Age of Renaissance game to America. Trading to something that's a little less defined, but to tell you the truth, Age of Renaissance wasn't all that well. I mean, they defined it as trading, but it didn't feel that way terribly. And likewise in this, it feels as though what you're doing as a player kind of changes throughout the game. Early on, you feel like colonial sectional regions, then it goes more to a political and sectional ideas, and then it goes to something that I don't even know what it is anymore. You know, I got pieces all over the place. I got pieces in Canada, I got pieces in the US, I got pieces in Mexico, I got pieces in areas that are just investment areas for my country. And it's just not very clean anymore, any kind of picture of it. Okay. There's a prior game that I think is very, very different in a lot of ways. And I say Age of Renaissance is the direct antecedent to this. But if you go back to Civilization, it has a similar kind of mechanism with, you know, advances that you have to buy and a board presence that determines how easy it is to buy them, etc. It's not as based on that, but it does highlight one of the differences between this and Age of Renaissance. Age of Renaissance is just a little bit more complicated than this. Not necessarily in the play of the game so much, but there's a few more advances and a few more categories of advances. There's maybe more odd things that happen on the deck. There's the chaos to manipulate, and all these different factors that, you know, to some extent make the last turns in Age of Renaissance more of a headache than the last turns of this. This is a slightly lighter game. So if you like Age of Renaissance, but don't feel like you can commit quite as much, I think this plays a little shorter. I think it plays a little lighter. And certainly the decision-making feels a little easier in most cases. On the other hand, because it's lighter, because the decision-making isn't as complex, it's also probably a less interesting game to people who are really, really into it and are willing to commit the time to it. And it's not a short game by any means anyhow. I mean, you saw most of it played out on the video, but still. Okay. Yeah. Well, let's look at the components. The map's functional, no work of art. Wooden pieces, I don't know, they're okay. I had one of my little yellow blocks is sort of misformed. Somebody miscut it or whatever when they made it. But you know, overall, you get they function. Putting the stickers on seems like some people had trouble with this. They were not that difficult for me. I didn't try to align them perfectly or anything. The cards are very good. They shuffle nicely. More flexible than a lot of cards. Play money. Nothing horrible about it. Nothing to write home about, though. And these little cards are quite functional and quite nice. I like them. unfortunately, you're using up a lot of paper here when you have this and then have these little markers for it. And do you really need the little cards too? I mean, the information's all on here. The breakthroughs are the one exception. They actually do need something to hold and note. You could have had stickers on blocks. You could have had counters, something else. And counters could be used on here to note this. Presumably you could use paper the way Age of Renaissance does. I find that somewhat of a less pleasing way to handle such things. But anyway, it functions. It takes up a lot of table space though, because of all these player mats and a big board and all this stuff. What else to say? Yeah, okay, so the complexity, what I was looking at a moment before I got into the components was there's this complexity leap from this to Age of Renaissance. The opposite sort of leap happens between Civilization and Civ, which is to say the earlier game is more simple. I find Civilization pretty playable and comfortable, even in a big solitaire game, until maybe right at the very end almost. I found Civ to be very painful, even playing just one person, me, figuring out all the points that I can get off of different advances that I have, and to pick the right order to get my advances in to maximize my points and all this kind of stuff. That's all missing from here. That's an aspect that I know some people like, is all those different paths to get to one place. Not all of them are optimal. You don't really have that here. Here it's really the bigger, bold decisions, you know. Do you want to improve your board presence and your profit, or do you want to get some of these because they might pay off later? But it's not, okay, now that I want to get some of these, how important is it that I buy them in the right order so that I score all my points? Boy, that's a real headache in Age of Renaissance, and that's all cleaned up and out of this. It makes it a lot more pleasant for me. The rule book, unfortunately for this, is not so great. This little player aid looks really fantastic, and I wish it were printed on cardstock and there was more room on my table or something, because it would have been really helpful to have the expanded turn order summary here. But for the rule book itself, there are some ambiguities here, which if you watched my video, the series, you would have seen. And there are a couple of places where I had to, and this happened right at the beginning, I had to look here in this reference book. The only place I could find it, not in things like these manifests and descriptions of the progressions, which really don't seem to contain anything more than is contained on the progress map. Waste of paper. Can anybody say that? There's a strategy guide in here, a couple of pages of that. Yeah, great. And there's a couple of turns in an example of play. Unfortunately, the example of play contains the only place where some of these rules or ambiguities are actually expressed in a useful manner. I find that even worse than just leaving them out completely. But yeah, and why? Because I've taught people games or played games with people, and we sit there and we learn the game from the rules, and then you know what? Somebody's reading it, the example of play, and they find out, oh, we're doing it wrong. And I look, and I'm like, yeah, that example is different from the rules, but the rules are pretty clear, or we had an ambiguity and we had to resolve it. And I mean, I'm not a person to read the example of play. If you've got something in the rules that's not clear, point me to the example of play if you think I'm not going to understand it. I'm reading SPQR, and you know what? Berg and Herman do a great job of, you know, this is tricky. Look at the example. Push some pieces around. Do this. You know, it's the, you may not be getting this right. And just clearing it up. Well, here it's not like the rules are complex. It's not like they're hard to understand. It's just they're poorly written. All right. And it's not terrible. It's certainly not the worst thing I've seen by GMT in terms of rules. But the game contains ideas that may not be familiar to every player. If you haven't played Age of Renaissance, if you haven't played Civilization, this is going to be... It's going to contain some little... I don't know, what am I doing here exactly? If you have, you still might not be certain what they mean by the rules. You know, I mean, normally when I'm told that I can select one card after drawing two, it'll tell me discard the other one, or put it at the bottom of the deck. It'll tell me something that I'm supposed to do with that other card. That's not present at all in here. All right. Just picked up Successors finally, and we're going to start SPQR next. I need to do a war game to maintain my sanity for this. This is really a pity for me because I went on this roller coaster with this sucker. I looked at it and I said, do I want this with this kind of weird simplified map? Is this just going to be too easy? Then I read the blurb at Board Game Geek, and I said, wow, that sounds really interesting. Then I bought it, and I didn't get a bad deal on it, but not a great one. And I looked and I said, it looks like Age of Renaissance Light. Well, that's what it is. And I played it. Partway through, I am loving the game. It felt like a much more... a much better story for me. Maybe just the particular theme, or maybe that there was a little less of these complex decisions to make. In terms of giving me a feel for what is happening in America. You know, I've got this area that's definitely forming around the Virginia aristocrats, and one that's started in the Northeast but got chased out, and I have the Canadians who, you know, obviously control more than they did historically, and Mexico, who's this powerful, you know, nationalist government building highways early on. And then it just scattered into something maybe even less well-defined than I feel that Age of Renaissance is. It just stopped making much sense at all to me. It became something where I'm trying to score victory points on a track. You know, it became a Euro to me. And no, it isn't. And in no way other than... But becoming more and more detached from its theme as the game went on is really a problem with this. And that saddens me a great deal. I think between two things, that and although it definitely showed some strong points in the early part of the game, but between that and the fact that it is so derivative of Age of Renaissance, I can't give this a very good rating. It's not a bad game. I'm going to look around a 6, I think, which I think Age of Renaissance I give an 8 because I recognize, wow, somebody really came up with something kind of cool here. You know, let's take Civilization and make it more of a die-rolling type thing, but make the card play more important to it and all this, that, and the other. And I really appreciate the thought and effort and the new design there. In this case, I'm left with something that, even though I think it's more enjoyable for me, and I'd be more willing to probably play it than Age of Renaissance, I can't respect as much because it really is that derivative. But again, if you're looking for a lighter version of Age of Renaissance, or you know, you don't want to spend whatever it goes for now, and you can find one of these for $20. It's not a bad game. All right.